Welcome to Homeroom, the podcast, presented by One Church Home, featuring different guests, hosts, and topics focused on building a solid foundation rooted in the Word of God. This podcast was created for those who desire to grow in the will and ways of Jesus. OCH believes in the God-ordained call for believers to commit to their local church. We ask that you would only consume these resources as supplemental and not as a replacement for your local church community. Let's jump into the conversation.
I am so excited to be back with you again. My name is Renée Rizzo, and I have a special guest, Janese, and you're going to hear from her in just a little bit. We are so thankful that Shane and the team have allowed us to have sacred space to have this conversation. And so I hope in the last episode you learned a lot. You might feel a little bit overwhelmed. It's okay. Go back and listen to it again. And I promise you, the more you really start to unpack this, the more you're going to want to become a part of this. And it's okay. And this is a tough topic. And we know that it's super hard and it can be super uncomfortable, but we know it's what God's commanded us to do. In this episode, I really wanted to dig in a little bit more about what a woman is even thinking when she's in an unplanned pregnancy and what's her thought process and where's the guy in all this? And if you're listening to this, well, what if you've already had an abortion and what resources are available to you? So the first thing I think that's surprising to folks is finding out what the age of most women are that are even thinking about an abortion or in an unplanned pregnancy. In our country, the national average is 18 to 24. That's the most likely age group that is going to come in the door. The second largest age group is 25 to 29. So let that sink in. 18 to 29 is the largest age group that we're seeing. Now, of course, in more rural areas, we have seen that age drop, but it is a small percentage in that 14 to 18-year-old group. And so we want to treat that population much more delicately, but be thinking about that. So if I'm in the 18 to 29 age category, what is she thinking about? She is trying to deal with where her relationship is at. Their relationship with her boyfriend or her partner may not be in a good place. She might be off to college for the first time. She might be working her first job. Things like insurance, finances, her dreams, her goals, her future, what her parents think of her, what her church might think of her. Those are all things that is running around in her mind. Now, a lot of times what I hear from the pro-life community is, well, if she could just see that it's a baby, she will just choose life. I wish that were that simple. And I would say for my age group and for most of the women who say that to me, we didn't know and we didn't have access to ultrasounds and the web. But believe it or not, when I would see girls coming into the clinic, they've already Googled everything. And they kind of have a pretty good idea of how far along they're in the fetal development of their baby. And so they are less surprised by that ultrasound. They're less surprised to see a beating heart. They're kind of already prepared for that to happen. But I think, as I mentioned in the previous episode, women that are contemplating abortion, by and large, they have high-stake risks. For many of them, it can be poverty, and it can be an income issue. As I mentioned, I read an article, when I arrived on the scene 18 years ago, and it said 70% of pro-choice women, 70% of pro-choice women would have had the child if they had a support system, meaning practical support system, mind, body, spirit. I know you'll be talking about that in a little bit. So we could actually reduce the abortion rate just by helping that 70% with practical support, because she might know it's a baby. And in fact, 70% of women considering an abortion already have another child at home. And so she's thinking really practically, where's this baby going to sleep? Do I have enough room? Do I have enough money to feed this child? What kind of insurance am I going to have for this child? Am I going to have daycare for this child? And so we have to be able to meet and understand those really practical needs. Now, we also may have girls who have the financial resources, and so they're less worried about that. But theirs might be more like, what if my dad finds out, my pastor finds out, my mom finds out? So their pain might be a little bit more shame and fear-based and less practical. And so if that's the client that we're talking to, we need to be able to reach and tap into that. So in both cases, it's less about trying to convince her that it's a baby and more hearing what she's tackling and unpacking and really trying to meet those needs. The second thing I always hear is, and you heard me touch on this in the last episode, is, well, where's the guy in all of this? I wish the guy would show up more, and I know you would agree. Most of the time, she wants him involved. He was involved getting her pregnant, and he needs to be involved in that. And so I know when I used to be at the clinic and I used to watch a guy come in and sit in the lobby, it'd be really easy for me to go, oh my gosh, that's the ding dong that got her pregnant. But what I really am thinking is, thank God he had the guts to show up, and he's going to stand up here in this conversation and be a part of it. It would be really easy, and the world has kind of allowed him to say, hey, it's your body, it's your choice, or I just want you to get rid of it and I'll pay you to get rid of it. It's a really easy way out for the guy, and we want him to come into the story and be a part of it. And so it's why most pregnancy centers have male interns and male staff. And Shane and I touched that in the earlier episode, but I have learned that young women, when they see male interns, male therapists, we've even had a male nurse practitioner. I know for a young woman who might have not been in a healthy relationship, rather than her being afraid walking in the clinic, it might be good for her to see, gosh, this is what a healthy man looks like. This is what it looks like for a guy to stand up. Like, I want that kind of guy. Maybe I deserve more than what I've been getting. And so I want us to dispel the myth that men cannot be involved at pregnancy centers or in this conversation. I actually think men can be a loving and supportive component and really change the way women view men sometimes in this story. The other thing I'm really sensitive to, and I always say this in my age group, I'm a little bit older than Anna. 1 in 3 women in my age group have had an abortion by the time they've ended their childbearing years. And in Anna's age group, it's probably 1 in 4. So whenever I'm talking about this conversation, I'm realizing that there's somebody listening to me who's had an abortion. And, and here's what I want to say to you. If you've had an abortion, please know that there's help for you. During this podcast, we will be sharing my email address all of the time. It is rizzo@reneerizzo.coach. And so if you are in the middle of an unplanned pregnancy yourself, or you are post-abortive and just listening to this is just stirring up stuff, and you are not sure you've unpacked enough, please email me and I will find you the right resources in your area. There's a lot of post-abortion recovery work that is out there. Some of it is done in one-on-one counseling. Some of it is done in group settings, Bible study settings, and we even have online support groups that are available to you. So depending on what your personality type is and where you live, I promise you that we will find the resources that you need. But enough about me, right, Anna? I can just tell you what it's been like in the last 18 years seeing it. But Anna is somebody who actually showed up at my doorstep about 10 years ago. And so we're going to kind of unpack some questions with Anna. And I'm just so grateful, Anna, that you are willing to come here 10 years later and talk about your story. Yeah. It is so common for women to want that story far behind them and not want to be known for that story. But I think you've owned and understood the call that God's put on your life. And it's not for every woman in an unplanned pregnancy, but you have learned much from it, and you have been such a good role model. So I'm so grateful you are willing to talk and share again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I do like to bring up these topics because, I'm 10 years out now, so the perspectives and the wisdom almost kind of changes with time, and and you can always kind of find some lesson that you've learned, even just reminiscing on it.
I love that. So my first question then is kind of take us back when you first found out you were pregnant. What were all those immediate thoughts and conversations that were rolling around in your head?
Yeah. I think, initially...
Now, you were 17.
I was 17. Me and my boyfriend at the time, we were broken up when I found this out. So, but I think there was a split moment when I first looked at the test, when I first found out, there was a split moment that's like instinctual as a woman, like, oh my God, like there is something growing inside of me, like, whoa, like that is, the gravity of that is not, you're not able to process it at that time. But then my next thought is like, how do I make this go away? Because I can't face my parents, just from my own shame. I can't face my parents. They don't even know that I've been sexually active. Like, how am I supposed to lay this on them? I can't do that. So how do I make this go away quickly? And I had that kind of thought. Quickly after having that thought was like, okay, no, wait, abortion is not something that I consider as an option for myself. Coincidentally, I had a therapy session that afternoon that I was kind of headed out to go to, and she helped me kind of break the news to my mom, and kind of helped me work through that as far as just breaking the news that this is what's going on. And I think having those kind of split thoughts of like abortion or how do I make this go away is, I think it's easy for all women to have those kind of thoughts. Even if you didn't think that you would ever consider it, is you're trying to remedy that shame immediately. Like you're trying to just, how do I just stuff this down?
Right.
You know, you're not thinking about consequences or what even that could mean for you in your life.
Yeah, I love that. I love that it's a dual thing going on. I think sometimes in this conversation, we think women are either completely pro-choice or completely pro-life, and that the reality is most women, no matter what their background is, they're actually wrestling with dual thoughts, competing with each other all at the same time.
Right.
So you told your mom first, and how did that end up going for you?
My mom she was like, well, at least, I'm glad you're not breaking the news to me that you have a terminal illness. Like, we're going to get through this kind of thing. Okay. And I really needed that. Like, that was huge.
Right.
My dad took it a little bit differently, and that's just another story for
another time.
But
then your dad has shared. I mean, we have gotten to know your dad, and your dad has openly shared at events with us about what that was like, unpacking his anger.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know too that my dad actually contacted Renee first. So he's the one that kind of reached out and was like, I need some help. And he was more so like, here's what's going to happen, so which in return, Renee kind of leveled him out and was able to have him process through. And having Renee a part of that process, the most important part was that she created this boundary that me and my parents didn't know that we needed at the time in order to process and heal separately. So Renee was kind of on the side dealing with my family, and they were sorting through their emotions alone without me. Because for me, I just wanted to save them. So I just wanted to protect them from being disappointed and being sad and upset. And how do I just, protect them? But me and Renee kind of worked together, and we were able to process through my decision and what that was going to look like, privately with just me, aside from what that means for my family.
Gosh, Anna, it's been so long. I forgot that was such a key component to what we did. And I want to pause in that moment for folks, because when her dad contacted me, I could tell he A, had a lot of anger. B, he was a businessman. And so the man already had a plan and the way out of this. And he was going to tell me what Anna was going to do and what I was going to do. And so the first thing I needed to do is tell him to slow his roll, that this isn't his area. Two, that it wasn't his decision. And that's when you have a strong parent who's protected his baby girl for a long time, telling him that this wasn't his decision was really hard. But I think the thing that broke him was the first thing I said to him, and I can hear all of it, but I have said before that sometimes anger is masking a lot of stuff. And what people don't realize when it's happening to parents too, the shame just isn't on you, but it's on them. And so the Lord just led me to say to him, let me stop you right here and tell you this. You did not fail as a parent. You did not fail. Because I think a lot of times parents react from their own sense of, what did I do wrong? How did I fail? How did my kid get here? It's my responsibility. And your dad's a strong guy. And he broke down in tears. And I think that was the barrier he needed to get past with it. This was not his fault, that God was still in control and God could still redeem this situation. And you're right. I think people forget that when you are pregnant and you're as young as you are, you needed a place to unpack how you were feeling, but they did, your dad and your mom needed a place to unpack their own shame, guilt, fear, concern, even if they weren't on the same page, like one wanted abortion or one wanted adoption or one wanted to parent.
Right.
We've learned that parents need to do that, just not in front of you, so that they can get on the same page so that when they are with you, they're a united front. So thank you for bringing that up, because I feel like that's such an important element to remember when you're in an unplanned pregnancy and the parents are very much involved. Now, and you kind of unpack that a little bit, but go back a little bit more, like, because I'm sure this story has put you in front of other women who've chosen abortion.
Right.
And so what have you seen the thing that tips young women in the direction to parent or choose adoption versus abortion? Like, what do you think have you seen as the thing that kind of puts her in that category?
Like you're asking what makes them decide either way?
Yeah.
I think a big thing is support and having that safe place to go and to get advice or wisdom that isn't really tainted by emotion. So finding somebody that maybe you can, some of the resources that Renee has, utilize those for just a safe place to go talk about this. Because when you are clouded and hearing so much noise from family and friends or your church, which it would be super unfortunate, but it's reality, though that can really have an influence on your decision, and it doesn't need to. So those boundaries need to be put in place. You need to know as an individual, and I think that changes the trajectory of their decision making, is knowing that this is actually about you, and you need to process through and make these decisions not based on what you're hearing.
I love that. That's so good. Now, where was your boyfriend in this story? Take us to that.
Yeah, not involved. We, like I'd said earlier, we were broken up. He was kind of like that bad boy that I met in high school that I was like, that guy will piss off my parents, so I'm going to go with him kind of thing. So it's kind of, and, he's done a lot of growing himself, but he was definitely shocked by the news and wanted to deny it. I just want to be candid. I think we forget that they can kind of have their own crazy reactions too, and just hang in there with them for a moment. Like, don't move them to the side just yet based on their reaction. Like, they're not just going to jump on board and be like, all right, what are we doing? How do I support you? Yada, yada, yada. Letting them have their place to process through too. He was getting ready to go into the military. We were just really young. I don't know kind of how to answer that. He wasn't, I think he was dealing with his own.
Yeah.
And he wanted to hide it. I think for the guy, it's a little bit easier to kind of bury it and hide it. I actually ended up telling his family. I had never met his family, but introduced myself and was like, this is what we're dealing with. I'm carrying your granddaughter, and hi, my name's Anna, kind of thing. So
I think you answered it exactly how I needed you to, which is why so many pregnancy centers have male interns and male counselors, because in the same way the parents need to be educated, he needs a safe place too to unpack his stuff. And I think the thing, especially when you're not in a committed long-term relationship, whether married or not, you're hormonally changing throughout the pregnancy. And so it's almost like God has designed your body to mentally and physically and emotionally prepare you for that pregnancy. And when you're not in a committed marriage, his body's not changing hormonally. And so even if you guys seem to start out on the same page, I see all too often the birth mom just go off into this healthy trajectory because God's kind of allowed that to happen, but he kind of can stay stuck. And so it is really important, if we want the young men to be a part of this decision and a stand-up father, then he needs to have his own support in this pregnancy that looks different than yours. Because again, he might not be equipped to it. I love that you brought that up. So when you look back now, you mentioned that your perspective might have changed. So you look back 10 years ago, and as you reflect back most about the time with you and I and the time with your parents, what stands out that, gosh, those were the pivotal moments that helped me the most?
I think, well, having Renee as somebody to kind of walk alongside us was critical, because she had experience in this kind of thing, and she could be delicate while also giving really great wisdom that came straight from experience with many other women, in order to just help us see through this and get to kind of the other side of that anger and hurt, which is initially what consumes you. But I look back and I think, wow, that was really brave. Even though it was my dad that, contacted and reached out to Renee, like, it was brave, the kind of measures that I took at the time, and the choices that I made at the time. And I kind of go back to like, well, I didn't really, my choice was to just be strong and get through this and have courage, and let's just do what we need to do. Because at the time, adoption was definitely desired in my family, not for me personally, but that's what my parents wanted to do at the time. So looking back, it's just kind of crazy to just reminisce on that, and not even, like, I just can't imagine my life being any different than it is now.
I love that. What would you say if someone's listening to this and they're a young adult and they're like, I got this. I'm not going to get pregnant. I'm going to totally have sex with whoever I want. What would you say to somebody who's even thinking about or starting to be sexually active?
Yeah, and I love this question, and I think it's really important. I think most importantly, if somebody were to come to me and they're talking to me about that, I would do what I could to create a safe place for them, to kind of be a part of that conversation. And I would ask them, like, why do you want to become sexually active? What is the why behind it? What do you think you're going to gain from it? And I wouldn't tell them what to do, but I think asking them to kind of look inward and figure out why they want to do that is important. And I think that kind of gets left out of the conversation a lot. And especially the age range of teenagers, they really want their parents to ask them questions like they want their parents to be like, what do you think about this? Like, why do you think people want to become sexually active? Or, what are your thoughts around this? And I think that's a great way to communicate with people, because they want to talk about what they think and how they feel.
I love that you said that. And y'all, I did not prompt her to say that, but in the next segment, Shane and I are going to be specifically talking about prevention. And I love that you're saying, believe it or not, parents, teenagers want you to be talking about this with them. That's amazing.
Yep.
Tell everybody where your story is today, because I think sometimes there's a misconception that people have an unplanned pregnancy and their whole life falls apart, and they have to choose between having a child and their life falling apart to having an abortion, and they can get all their dreams fulfilled. first, let me toot your horn for just a moment. Anna could have just relied on their parents' income and resources to get her through this pregnancy, but you were 17, you graduated early, you did everything I asked you to do, the homework I asked you to do. You did not take the easy route. And I remember things like you were selling incidental items in your home that you didn't need anymore so that you would have money for your child. And I thought, what 17-year-old is making these kind of sacrifices? And so I would say you did everything you needed to do to become a healthy and equipped parent, and you didn't rely on your parents to provide the resources and or help you raise your child. Not that they didn't help you,
right?
But you really proved to all of us, you're like, no, I want to parent, and I'm going to show you that I'm going to be ready to parent.
Yeah.
Because I think that leads into part of your success on who you are today. And so tell everybody a little bit about what your story looks like today.
Well, fast forward, I was a single mom for 7 years, and that taught me a lot. So I think it is really easy to talk about to these women who are facing unplanned pregnancy, what they're dealing with during pregnancy, but also like it's just as important to be a support after the baby is born. Those 7 years of being a single mom really taught me a lot. And I grew so much. And then I got remarried in 2016. And then after about a year of us being married, we tried to conceive. And then I was faced with infertility and went through that for several years and went through IVF. And so looking back, I'm super grateful for choosing life at 17, of course. But I also kind of have this wisdom from both sides of the spectrum of like being faced with an unplanned pregnancy and how that can impact you, but then also like pleading for a baby 10 years later and really grasping the miracle it is to conceive a child. Like how many stars have to align, and it's just a miracle. It's unbelievable what goes into conceiving a child. And it's just, I feel like having my son 2 years ago, I just have this other layer of gratitude, really, for parenting and also for being there for women who have been on both sides of that, or just one side, and because it ultimately comes down to who can be there with you to help you get through these moments and think a little bit more clearly when you don't feel like you can because you're emotionally a mess,
I love that. Anna, you brought up a few key things that I wanted to sit in the pocket of is a lot of times when young women find themselves in an unplanned pregnancy, folks will say, well, you have plenty of time to have a child and you can get pregnant again. And the fact that they call it secondary infertility is very, very common. And so you're a perfect example of, no, you may not necessarily be able to get pregnant. And I remember when you shared your story with us at our fundraising event a few years ago, you were in the sea of not being able to conceive. And I know what it's like. I mean, and you had a child and you did choose life. And I also have walked with friends who have had multiple abortions who then try to get pregnant and still can't conceive. And they go through an extra layer of guilt of like, well, I'm being punished and I had an abortion, so now I'm not allowed to get pregnant. And sometimes they did get pregnant and sometimes they didn't. And they've had to sit with that decision. And so we don't realize what a gift it is to have life and how heavy that decision is. So thank you for reminding us of that. I'm so grateful to you. I know you've got a successful career too. You are not just a mom of two children, which would be a great thing all in and of itself. and that you are married. And so you have shown that you can have a full and healthy life, but you also went through single parenting.
Yeah.
And it's why I say to pro-life people all the time, don't just help the pregnant woman before and after the baby. Go help single mom programs out there, because she may be doing this alone for a pretty long time, and we need to remember that. Did I miss anything that you're like, I want to make sure if someone's listening, they hear me say this? And that's okay if I got it all, but I wanted to make sure I gave you a chance to.
I think it's important when being faced with people who are really celebrating abortion as an option. I think my reaction to these kind of people have changed over the years, but I think it's important to really know in your heart that the best way to deal with those kind of people is kind of putting yourself in the back seat and letting God deal with their heart and do work on their heart. You really just never know somebody's story. You really just never know somebody's story. I think that's so important. And so as a Christian, really just being the image of Jesus himself and being loving and inviting and safe to no matter what somebody is going through, what their past is, or what they're raising the banner for, like abortion. Because that's not their identity, and that couldn't change. Their view and their feeling could change at any moment. So just being that loving place and allowing, don't act on emotion, don't act on hurt and anger, but just to let God do the work on their heart.
Girl, I cannot say that better myself, so I'm not going to even try. I will say to all of you who are listening, if you are in the middle of an unplanned pregnancy, or you have been through an abortion, or you're parents of this story and you're like, I need resources, I don't even know where to start, feel free to email me at reneerizzo.coach, and I will get you to the right place, because I want you to make sure that there's a safe place for you to unpack your story as well. Thank you so much, Anna, for being a part of this. I'm so very proud of you.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you have two amazing children, because they are great. They are lucky to have you as a mama.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.